ladies and gentlemen, everyone around and in between. It is DebateSensei, and we are back with yet another season. Can you believe that we've done 10 seasons so far, or we're starting to do the 10th season right now? I have with me my faithful companion, Tim CEDA, Proto Communication, San Diego. San Diego State University. Oh.
Yeah, we're going to record this motherfucker.
Yeah.
Chief Manager Officer right here. That's what I'm going by now. And,
all right.
Director of all things generally related to San
Diego, though.
Yeah. What's up?
Still located down in beautiful San Diego.
Sure are. And we're just going to clip that last bit there.
All right. So, we are going to we're taking the broadcast in a slightly, not really a different direction. We're just kind of focusing in more on IPDA and allowing our other limited prep broadcast series NPDA to be able to take its focus there as well. And so if you want to check out any additional strategies that affect, I think IPDA and NPDA kind of go hand in hand because they're both limited prep events, go ahead and check out our other broadcasts. But we are focusing on IPDA. And our first episode for this 10th season is going to do a deep dive on one topic area. And that topic area is going to be the lab-grown versus natural debate in the various areas in which it is applied. So we're going to get going. All right.
So now, Tim, areas where lab-grown things are in competition with natural produced or naturally harvested things. I think the easy one that comes to the top of people's mind is often diamonds.
Yes.
Right? So getting into that just a little bit, I think we can maybe say here are some of the more popular areas where those things come up, and then diving into them. So within the world of diamonds, natural diamonds have been around now for the actual material has been around for jillions of years, but as an industry, it's really been big since like the 20s, where like De Beers holds the vast majority of the market, and they like artificially control that market by only releasing certain diamonds and things. But it's such a huge demand with like the engagement ring and jewelry industry. So the argument is that like pretty costly, both in time and environmental impact and like actual human lives, to harvest natural diamonds, versus now diamonds can be grown in a lab. So with a small space and just a huge amount of energy, a little like nugget of carbon can be microwaved and turned eventually into a diamond in the span of a couple months.
Okay. So we'll get into a little bit more about the nitty gritty, but I wanted to kind of like broadly cover some of the areas first. So gemstones, not just diamonds, but gemstones, all sure. So beyond that, gemstones, natural versus lab grown is one of the great like debates that are happening. I think the other gigantic one is meat. So for consumption in particular, right? Sure. So lab grown meat, you're getting all the and a little bit on that is the lab grown meat. It doesn't require slaughtering of a bunch of animals, but not too many people know that it still requires animals, that you still have to get sample cells from that. You can't just, I guess there's a danger in just replicating the same cells over and over again, which we'll kind of get into in a little bit. But there's like lab grown meat. You're getting your beef and your chicken from a lab rather than from a livestock farmer.
I'd be interested in how many are needed, right? Like just how many samples are needed, because I understood it was like functioning like a biopsy, like a piece of tissue. But I guess that probably is not possible just to replicate that same thing a jillion times. Like traditional meat has like marbling and a variety of a single piece of muscle tissue isn't monolithic. So those are certainly two of the biggest ones. So if a topic came up in IPDA, sometimes you get those more general type topics, and those they might not be specifically defined, and it's up to the affirmative side to sometimes they can negotiate it out, but come up with like, all right, this is the direction we're going. Another one that's really kind of gaining some traction is human organs. So the ability to print or to basically replicate kidneys. This was like something that was fully accomplished in Japan. So some kidneys have been grown out of stem cells using some kidney tissue into like fully functioning kidneys for like rats and mice and pigs and things that are totally working. So like those transplants were successful, and those animals were able to use kidneys that did not come from another creature. Like they were just completely grown. Amazing.
Yeah. Now you were telling me about coral, that you can grow coral in a lab.
Yeah, so that's the same thing. I don't know if this is quite as much to call it like lab grown. Maybe grown is now where you'd start to get into some topicality realm.
Maybe,
but it's more so the breeding process of coral, because coral is not like a plant; it's an actual animal that produces the hard stuff that you think of as a reef. It's obviously super important for a ton of ecosystems and other animals. In order to grow that, though, like their breeding cycles are super narrow and specific, and all the effects of climate change are what's causing some of those challenges there. So scientists have figured out how they can basically breed coral. So it's not like growing coral all the way from scratch, but it is essentially like breeding coral and then raising it to maturity to where like it can now replicate in a lab environment, so that it's basically off to the races the same way as like a kidney. They're growing it from small all the way up to something that fully functions. And that's been extremely successful. So like coral transplants are a thing that were successful, for example, up in San Diego, like up by San Onofre, where they had the nuclear power plant. A ton of reef and stuff had to be regenerated, so we had to like replant reefs, and that's easier done if it's started and kind of nurtured in a lab instead of rather than just like seeding the ocean itself.
As you were talking, I was just looking it up just to see. I'm like, does it count as lab grown? Because I'm wondering if it was more like 3D printed, but no, they like people are calling it lab grown coral, because 3D printing is like you have like an extruder or something to that effect,
right? Yeah,
that's layering it. But this would be actually sort of cultivating it in a lab, and yeah, that's what they're doing. They're growing in a lab.
So the last one that I saw that I don't think comes up all as often is that's functionally the same kind of main points you would make in many of the debates is lab grown clothing, specifically leather. So you consider that many particular cows are raised their entire lives just for their hides, right? It's like leather cows aren't used for dairy, they're not used for meat, they're not used for any of the other things. They're just used for their hide. So and then a ton of that is wasted, right? Because like hides aren't the shape of the things that we turn them into. So that's like a huge amount of land use and water and waste and things, basically just to kill an animal for its hide only. So the argument is that like these same tissues can be made so it's the exact same material grown in a lab into the exact shape that we want, so there's no loss. And then you can actually even do some crafty things with it, like shape it with even thinner materials or even stronger materials. Like basically you can control the molecular structure as opposed to just like hoping you get the right kind of hide and quality. You can craft it exactly the way that you would want leather to function, and it is still technically chemically the exact same function or exact same material. It is still leather.
Okay, so after that I start losing options. I can't. I'm having a hard time really identifying anything beyond those examples.
Yeah, and even those, I think you can probably lump in like meat and clothing and organs probably into like the same like tissue grown in labs, right?
Right. So let's talk a little bit about like wording and how that might affect things. Like, so if it was just that lab grown is better than natural, if that was the only words in the resolution, if you were on the affirmative, which one would you be going for? Or would you only be going for one?
I mean, I would certainly, in the strike process, I would absolutely be going for lab grown, right? Like I would really, really prefer that as an avenue. Oh geez, I also just realized there's totally an area that you could get into some tea just because it's up to popping the news. I think you could make some arguments about in vitro fertilization. There's like all of the kind of PR talking like historically of saying that in vitro fertilization is not the same thing as like natural births, and that gets really like messy and hairy, but it is a hot topic in the news right now. So I think
that's a really good
time. I would probably try and steer away from that. I'd probably like request my opponent not define it that way, and if I were on the affirmative, I wouldn't define it that way. But I think that's something you probably want to at least like read up on and maybe have some good like critical arguments of like why it's really not cool to call that lab grown. But
if somebody's going for that, if it's actually lab grown is better than natural, like you're like, I think that when it comes to human reproduction, you might be on the wrong side of that one. It's like, we should not exclude lab grown, like, but that doesn't make it better. It's just another option, right?
Yeah, I think that's where, like, I would certainly prefer to be on the negative, because I think you can just really start tearing up the language right there of like, we're not talking about car seats or bags here. Like, this is human life, and therefore, like, we really gotta nix that. But so anyways, digression from that. If I'm on the affirmative, saying lab grown is better than natural, I would probably go the avenue of diamonds. I don't really see a whole lot of downside to that one. Organs, there's like, it's in like some technical kind of avenues and whatever, but I would probably define the resolution. I would say it's something like lab grown diamonds are preferable to naturally mined diamonds, and make it just a value debate talking. And then, the value of something to the effect of like, quality of life for all living things. Because you can get into like economic stuff, but I think those always end up relating back to quality of life one way or another. And for all living things means that I can bring in some of the environmental angles. So I think it's a broad enough value that's accessible on both sides. I don't know. What do you think you'd do on the negative?
Well, just for lab grown versus natural, if that was, so we're starting with like different wordings, right?
Yeah.
And so if it was just that broad, I would be really worried.
Well, I mean, you're the one that gets to define it, right?
Yeah. Well, no, lab grown. Oh, if I was on the affirmative?
Yeah. Well, I'm saying, like, if you were on the negative and the affirmative side just left it as versus, that's not really like a well-defined resolution. That's something like, here's the resolution that I would come forth with. Like, this thing is preferable to this thing.
Yeah.
Is there maybe like a better way that you think you'd prefer to word a resolution like that if you were on the affirmative and got the right to do that?
Oh, I might want to do a little bit more on like a governmental policy, because it's too easy for somebody like to just say you should go out and buy lab grown rather than natural. Whereas a government policy, I think, would have a lot more sort of implications, like economic implications. You know what I mean?
Okay.
And so it would at least give the negative some ground on that one. I just don't think that, like, should your next personal purchase of a gemstone be lab grown or natural? It seems a little one-sided to me.
Yeah,
you know what
that's fair.
But whether or not it's like, I don't know, like, well, you should ban natural diamond sales, mined diamonds, like that. I think that might be like an outright ban would be an awesome way to word the resolution.
Yeah, I think if I would actually prefer to be on the negative side of that one, because I think you can get into some pretty crazy backlash, like supply and demand economics arguments of like, you are actually going to supercharge the diamond industry by banning, right? Because now everyone's gonna be like, oh no, these are real. It's like Cuban cigars, right? Like, you have made it illegal, therefore you've driven demand. As it's already this thing that's just about like rarity, you have now made it super rare, and everyone really wants that. So like,
oh my God, it's already the currency of criminals. You know what I mean? It's like, you see it on movies. They have little satchels of diamonds that they're exchanging for stuff like that. Now, oh my God,
that's way more valuable. I mean, because it becomes like an extra sexy black market. I feel like, yeah, sure, you're gonna hurt Cartier and De Beers and whatever that like have to operate above board. But I think in a way, I think you'd end up actually supercharging the diamond industry that's already about rarity and marketing.
Yeah, I mean, like, in fact, I would be down to write like ban for the other ones too. Like, does it make any sense for coral? Obviously.
But
like,
only natural coral and only natural coral.
But like, especially for like clothing, and you're like, okay, like, we can't use any more animal products for clothing. Oh my God, that'd be a wild debate, man.
Weirdly, so I think that also would really vastly explode the industry, though. Like, I think the only one that I wouldn't be able to use that disadvantage is like human organs. But I mean, you're not going to ban like natural organ transplants.
No.
I think it's actually almost more likely that you would ban the development of human organs. So the only like reason that actually you might have some legs to stand on is some human organs at this point in time can only be made in space. So lungs, for example, is like one of the main reasons why we want to do more research in low Earth orbit. Because it's like all the little alveoli, right? Like the little sacs that constitute lungs. To print a functional sphere that is like so delicate and fragile like that has to be able to expand, you need basically zero gravity to do it.
Because they're in the womb, like usually it's supposed to happen in the womb, and that's effectively zero gravity. Yeah,
right. Yeah, like the suspended space, and also just like the way that natural tissues multiply and grow, like mitosis versus like 3D printing. Is kind of a way, like, so there's just really some hyper expensive barriers to entry, and I think that's probably like the very generic disadvantage to all of these is like it's a very expensive alternative, right? With the exception of lab grown diamonds, because funny enough, those are cheaper than natural diamonds, but that's again like a function of like market supply and demand and like control. Right. But with like human organs and all these things, like they are hyper expensive, and so you could kind of say that you really are just over commoditizing and like basically making it already more accessible only to like the super wealthy. I don't know that there's like a ton of signs that like they will become easier to manufacture or easier to replicate, the way that like, all technology starts really expensive. Like the first iPhone cost millions of dollars to make, but like now they're cheaper or whatever. I don't know that same model necessarily applies to organs. And so you're kind of, I don't know, maybe starting to create this commoditization. And there's been, a good amount of ethical argument against financially incentivizing organ donation or like organ transplants and things.
Yeah.
So that's, I think, the only one that I think you can get tricky into like why you would want to ban. Okay. So if not a ban, any other like resolution tools you think you might want to use?
I don't know. Like you might have something that kind of frames it that where, like, I don't know. I don't think I'd come across one like this, but I'm thinking like lab grown diamonds or natural diamonds are a better investment than lab grown diamonds.
Oh, you can make like a background. Yeah.
Yeah.
Actually, I kind of like the background of it, because I think then it allows you to just, pile on like a good amount of quantitative evidence on a particular side. Like, I mean, you could even probably say like the economic impact of,
that's the other one I was going to go for, is like, like in terms of economics, like forcing the hand of the debaters, right?
Yeah. And I think if you did something like clothing, it probably is a little bit more even footing. I don't know that most debaters are like nice and trying to create the most even debate, but I think for like tournament directors that are trying to use this sort of subject and formulate a topic for it, I think that like the clothing debate might be a little bit more even, because there's like a huge number of jobs that are all precipitated from the clothing industry. It's not just like the cattle and the land and the resources those take, but then it is like the, tanning process, and then it is the, design process, then it is the actual manufacturing, that is distribution, sales, etc. So there's like whole, swaths of the economy that are affected by this that might be, more significantly impacted if it's sourced in a different way. I don't know. And maybe that doesn't stand as well.
Yeah. And they might put like some sort of time limitations on it. Like now is not the time to convert to lab grown meat or something, and so that would kind of call into question, at what point is this industry, is it ready to go to market, or do we need to wait a little bit on stuff like that?
Yeah. I think the other easy, I guess it's not easy, but it's an important one, is regulation. So there exists like a pretty decent amount of regulatory red tape around all of these things, with the exception of diamonds. That's already like fairly open. But there's already like pretty, solid regulation against selling lab grown meat. Now that might be just because the like, meat and dairy lobbies are super, super powerful, right? Like they're just not going to let a competitor jump into their space because they've got a ton of lobby, clout. But also probably some good considerations. Like as soon as you're producing food that is, I mean, talk about GMO, like this is the kind of nth degree of a GMO, right? Like it is genetically modified from the literal first cell. So I think like you can start having a little bit more of that debate. So I think that's where, if I'm on the negative, I'm going to go practical on a number of these things. I'm going to go for cost. I'm probably going to go like the practicality. Like this is really going to, have a lot of like political frustration like this. Any time that you're disrupting the dairy lobby, right, or disrupting like the meat lobby, that's going to have like economic and political backlash, because like the heartland of America is an important like voting base. a ton of jobs that are already in like very, challenge recessed areas. It is a hard, living to be a farmer. So I think those are some contentions that I would make, even though you're not going to win the whole point. I think you might be able to outweigh.
I do think that like on the neg, the one that you could probably go for that applies to almost all of them is just politics. I mean, you could talk about like either political backlash from government officials or from individuals. I mean, can you imagine if people aren't allowed to eat their steak anymore? Like, what sort of chaos would ensue from that? Like, even if you phase it out over 10 years, you say you're going to do it over 20 years. Like, I can't imagine that is going to just be like accepted quietly, or even with just minimal amount of backlash. It would be a major backlash.
The Revolutionary War is kicked off from a tea tax. What do you do when you ban steak, right? Like, it's not going to go well.
So I think that it's not necessarily the cost benefit analysis of the meat itself, or many of these other lab grown things, but like when you mandate lab grown stuff, what are the implications of that is more of the question.
Yeah, I think some of the fundamental shifts to the farm bill that would be required in order to actually execute that, right? Like there's no way that like labs are able to meet the demand. So like there's already just now going to be a huge, shock to a market that is, kind of tenuous, like food services. So that's, I think, another challenging one. One that I wanted to bring up on the subject of diamonds.
So let's do a few, because there's a few disadvantages that are kind of unique to these topics on the neg. I definitely want to get into some of those, but what were you going to say?
Yeah, so on the subject of diamonds, because I think that one is already a lot more advanced. Like many of these others are still kind of speculative, like they're not super competitive yet. It's more of just hypothetical. This is already like a practical one that's really functioning out there. The natural, and also not just diamonds, but gemstones. So you brought up a really interesting subject here. Sapphires are already really, prolifically made in labs. And then funny enough, this was like I don't remember what year the iPhone 5 came out. Remember, it was like the first time that the button didn't have the little thing in it, but it was like you could put your thumbprint on it and open your iPhone. When that first happened, that little thing that little button that could scan your thumbprint had to be made of sapphire. Apple functionally destroyed the artificial sapphire market single-handedly before it began. There was only one company that had really like at scale been able to manufacture artificial sapphires, because otherwise it's like way too expensive to like buy and slice, real like natural sapphires. There just wasn't enough demand. But Apple churns out how many, trillions of millions at least of iPhones. So they started buying from this company as like their exclusive supplier, but like they negotiated their contracts in such an aggressive way that this company could basically exclusively supply to Apple. And then Apple could just drive the price down so far that the company basically went bankrupt until Apple bought them. So Apple like more or less like demolished the market for artificial sapphire. So I think if you're going in like a gemstone direction, you can say like, hey, this is all, it's still like an early young industry that can be so easily beaten around by some of these like mainstay competitors as soon as something becomes valuable enough. And God, there's, billions of dollars of value in the diamond market or in, any given precious stone market.
I am kind of interested, and I really have not developed these arguments very well, so forgive me, but some of the cultural elements of this. And what I mean is that gemstones were kind of like traditionally about ensuring some sort of value for some, like you're giving a wedding ring or an engagement ring. That was supposed to be some sort of assurance to the person that you're giving it to, that it's like, okay, if things go bad, you have this ring to fall back on. And so that might not be as true anymore, right? You know what I mean? So I don't, that's what I'm saying is like these cultural elements, I don't know if they have the same weight, but the resale value on lab grown diamonds is so incredibly low that it did pique my interest on what sort of cultural implications that might have. Right?
Okay, interesting. So, you do talk about the like, resale values are like the investment. So if the topic came down to something like this is a good investment, like natural diamonds, I imagine if anything, the like lab grown, like the proliferation of lab grown might actually be driving up the value of natural diamonds.
Maybe like
well, all I know is that you can sell a natural diamond for like as much or more than you originally purchased it for and lab goes the opposite direction, I would imagine that those two things might have some interplay.
Maybe. I honestly, I haven't researched that particular interaction. All I know is that it's impossible to get a lab grown diamond appraised. And like the resale just like drops off a cliff as soon as you get it, whereas when you get a natural diamond, it goes up in value over time. So
right. Yeah, weird how that is. Like that's just a conversation of like how we culturally define value.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe your argument is like, good, we should drive the value into the dirt because it's a piece of carbon, and like we shouldn't be, like killing people in mines over this stupid piece of carbon. Like, I think that's part of the argument. And then the maybe natural next couple progressions are that like diamonds fall entirely out of fashion, or like they become, as valuable as quartz or something like that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that would fall into whether or not like there was a ban on it or a restriction or a regulation, or even if you are choosing to give that to somebody, that choice would have cultural implications that you can, like that you might want to account for. So I don't know. Man. Like I think
that cultural implication. So like, yeah, that's actually, this may not go as well, but I think you can somewhere along the way make the claim that like diamonds are not mined in the US. Diamonds are not mined in Europe for the most part. Like it's predominantly like Africa as I understand where many diamond mines come from. Really, really, really awful human rights violations happen in diamond mines. That doesn't necessarily mean though that we ought to ban natural diamonds. I feel like there might be instead like a better argument around like shift regulations on or shift the management of diamonds or something like that, to where you can say like this is a natural export of a place that might of like a particular country that might not have many other really valuable exports. So like as an economic backbone of like the Congo or something, you take away natural diamonds and like that might have impacts significant elsewhere. Whereas like if the industry were changed, it might not have as harmful of global economic impact or like fallout. So yeah, it's a tricky one, because then now you're like, okay, we're gonna fiat the DRC to change their human rights policies. It's probably getting hairy there. But there's one other thing: there doesn't exist an international precious gem mining regulatory body. There's like the international gemstone associations and things like that, evaluate quality, but they don't really get into mining. That's just like an area that, Tiffany's just prefers to look the other way, as do all the other companies. They're like, well, we're not going to remember where we got it, but look at the quality here. We really regulate the quality. You can, maybe that's like the area that you start fiating. Like, we're going to make an international body that regulates this industry. Well, let's actually get to the heart of it instead of like just trying to take it away and make it different. Like, maybe you're getting to some, I don't know, like tech colonialism, where it's like, well, we're just once again taking away a resource and solving it with power. Final disad actually on natural or on lab grown diamonds, they take a crazy amount of power to produce.
Yeah, I wanted to make sure we touched upon that.
Yeah, so that's like just a good disad to have in your back pocket. It's something like 750 kilowatts. So like the average American household's total power consumption for like a week per carat, right? And that's for every diamond. So like just the sheer power consumption is enormous. So I think that's something that we're so frequently like, oh, electric cars or, any other kind of battery-based, like power-based thing. We're just assuming that we can get a ton of power without really considering where that power comes from. We're just trading it off. So like, it's not actually all that clean of an industry when you consider just how much power it requires.
Yeah, and there's different processes, and I cannot remember the acronyms for each of them, but some of them take more energy than others, and I don't know what the quality output is, but like why you choose a different process for it, it determines how much energy you use and how that affects, the global environment.
Interesting. Cool. So yeah, I think that there are a whole bunch of good topics that can come about from just the grander subject of natural versus lab grown. So tournament directors, fit that into some subjects, or if you were a debater, like read up on both sides of a few of these things. And I think you got, a good potential to win some rounds this year.
Yeah. I think there are just a couple more on like the meat grown stuff. Like if we could, the energy production is even like I think higher for meat grown. I think they did a comparison on how much energy is used. Yeah, I think because I can't imagine that the carbon footprint of lab grown diamonds is larger than mining stuff. Like it's hard for me to imagine that. And it's still hard for me to imagine that natural meat is less harmful to the environment than lab grown meat. But I think it's at least more possible. You know what I mean? It's like, I'm like, okay, it's probably close within the realm. I saw something that like the amount of energy that it takes to create the same amount of protein is like 25 times in a lab than if you're getting it off of, but I don't know how
when you say energy though, like in a natural environment, you're taking energy from the energy, what do they call it? Energy transport layers, whatever. It's like from the grass that the cows eat and from the water that they drink, and that requires acreage and more water and whatever. Like, I can't imagine it's that type of energy you're talking about. You're talking about like joules of energy.
Yeah, I'm guessing that it's like how much it takes to run the machines to do everything.
Okay, like the sheer electricity. Got it.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. And even then, I don't think that would be the most accurate measure. But if you were measuring it that way, it seems like there is a case to be made that lab grown meat is using, at least right now, is using more energy in that particular measure.
Ooh, so I mean, maybe you're saying like, all right, we're really going to trade pastures for coal-fired power plants. Like,
yeah,
like that's actually maybe that could get worse. Granted, we don't use a ton, but like the majority of our energy mix is not particularly clean in the U.S., and you're now demanding a significant increase there, where at least like cows do live over like pasture and natural environments, with the exception of like CAFOs and stuff that get super nasty. I don't know. I think good arguments and trade-offs to be made there. You can't skip over just like the sheer animal suffering though that comes from meat, like the natural meat industry.
Here's what I got. I got a University of California Davis study found the global warming potential of lab grown meat is 4 to 25 times greater than retail beef. What? Man.
Sponsored by.
Yeah. Well, it said it was UC Davis.
I mean, they are in the heart of CAFO territory.
Yeah.
I do wonder who funds their program.
Wondering. That's an interesting thing to follow up on. That's interesting to follow up on.
Good to know, though. That's fascinating.
One last thing about lab grown meat is like it's at its early stages. Apparently, the way it works is that you take cells and you're supposed to like replicate them, right? You're supposed to multiply them. Well, there's something about like cell replication that if it starts multiplying exponentially, it could like lead to what's dysregulation of cell or like cancer causing stuff. Right? You know what I mean? Like, because that's basically what cancer is just cell on a runaway sort of multiplication, exponentially like multiplying and things like that. Now, again, a lot of this stuff is so scientifically dense that it's hard for me to speak intelligently about it. But the fact that it's so early means that it's like, okay, let's wait a second. Like if the way that you're doing this is taking living cells and sort of triggering them to multiply, let's be careful. Let's make sure that everything's safe before we do that.
Yeah, that's I think a good a good like cautionary disad, if nothing else.
Yeah, by the time it's like in your freezer aisle, I think like it's probably gone through plenty of quality control. So
but rushing it to that point, let's take our time there.
Yeah, I don't know. Just a few things to think about, a few things to research a little deeper. I do not feel like I have a grasp on the details of these things because, we just kind of like, jumped in with both feet looking into this topic. I'm like, oh, wow, this is amazing. All the stuff that they're doing. I had no idea about the coral.
Yeah. Cool stuff.
All right. So, hey, everybody, that's first episode back. Season 10. We're going to actually be doing a full season. We've been kind of doing these half seasons, and so we're going to do a full competitive season of IPDA for this one. Check out our other series: cross-examination debate, parliamentary debate, Lincoln Douglas debate. We have all the different types that we're covering. We are Tim and Jared for DebateSensei, and we will see you later.
See you then.